All right, here we go. Scott Sambucci here over at SalesQualia, and it is the fourth and final installment of my startup lessons from the trail, lessons from the Western States 100 Ultra Marathon. So over the last couple of weeks, I've been documenting lessons from the trail as I'm out there running these races, training for these races. Lots of time on the trail gives you lots of time to think. And in those times that I'm thinking, I'm always trying to relate what I'm doing out there in my training to what it's like to run a startup, going from idea to impact. And that journey that every founder is on really does feel like an ultra marathon. So in the prior to the Western States 100, I did 4 additional installments of pre-race lessons from the trail. And now this is the 4th of the post-race lessons from the trail. So no shortage of lessons, at least from my perspective, that I hope that as you're listening in, you can translate this to your journey, your ultra marathon as you're ramping and scaling your startup. So let's just dive in. And by the way, if you've missed the first 7, that's totally fine. You can listen to this one and then go back and catch any or all of those previous episodes. I've tried to make these as modular as possible. There is some storyline in between each of those, but I think just listen to this. If this is the first one that you're catching, is totally fine. Don't feel like you have to listen to the first 7 in order to get anything out of this particular installment that I'm doing. So let's talk about lessons 9 and 10 and the post-race lessons from the trail. So prior to the race, I came across this quote in a book by Scott Jurek, who is basically a legend in the ultra running community. He wrote a book, he's written a couple of books. And in his book that I was reading a couple of days leading into the race, he had this quote in the book, which is fall down 7 times, get up 8. It's a Japanese proverb. And I specifically think about this as a lesson from the trail because I'm sure you can already think about the times where you've had to fall down or you have fallen down in your journey and you've had to pick yourself up. So let me talk a little bit about my experience on the trail in this particular race. So on my screen, if you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn, you can see it's a picture of me. This is pretty early in the race, right around mile 12. Had a photographer out there snapping pictures at a place called Cougar Rock. And the reason I'm showing this particular picture is not so much the picture of me, but I want you to see the trail at the bottom of the photograph here. And you can see you're running through the wilderness, running through the mountains, through the Sierra Nevadas, and you can see that there's just lots of rocks on the trail. Lots of the trail has these rocks that kind of stick out. Some of them are sharper rocks, some are granite, some are a little bit looser, kind of scree, where you kind of you plant your foot and you'll slide down. Not all of the trail is like this. Not all of the 100 miles is like this. Some of the trail is actually really nice. There's parts of it where it's smooth dirt and pine needles and you can just kind of jam on down the decline. Other parts of it are obviously really rocky, like you can see here. And for me, as I've done these races and even in my training over the years, I know that I have a tendency to do what we call in ultra running, we call it Supermans. So Supermans, you can imagine Superman flying through the air with his arms outstretched. In ultra running, Supermaning means that you kick a rock, you hit a rock or a root, and you go flying forward with your hands through the air, and you basically do what's called Supermans. So I've done this in previous races. I've done this in my training. It's usually just either you missed the rock altogether, you didn't see it because it's kind of camouflaged in with the dirt, or you just got tired legs. There's been plenty of times where I see a rock coming down the trail as I'm coming down the trail, and I'll say to myself, hey, make sure you don't kick that rock. And lo and behold, I just didn't get my leg high enough, and boom, I kick the rock, and flat on my face, I land. I have this tendency to do these Supermans. In a race, just for context, I did a race a couple of years ago in Oregon called the Mount Hood 50. So it's a 50-mile race near Mount Hood outside of Portland. And in that particular race, the course is on the Pacific Coast Trail, and in this area is lots of forest, and so not as many rocks, but lots of roots sticking out all over the place. And in that race, I Supermaned, I think I counted 13 times. So 13 times over 50 miles, I kicked a root and landed on my face. I remember coming into the midway point of the race where my wife and son were waiting for me, and I had my hands were all skinned up, and my knees were skinned up. And my wife looked at me. She's like, "What happened to you? You look like you got attacked by a mountain lion." And I said, I probably fell 8 or 9 times already. in this race. So I have a tendency to Superman. And in my pacer guide, I even told my pacers, I mentioned this in my pacing guide where I said, look, I have an inclination to kick rocks and Superman to the ground from time to time. That's usually just tired legs. The good news is I've done this enough and I can usually fall without incident by rolling a little bit. So my son actually has done some gymnastics and parkour, and he's actually taught me how to fall. He's like, when you fall, you should roll so you kind of keep the momentum of the energy instead of coming down abruptly. So I've actually practiced falling out there on the trail. You think about, like, I've literally thought of everything. So in the pacer manual, I wrote down, then after I Superman, I get up, I dust off, and I keep moving. Just letting you know now, in case that happens, it's not unusual, and I know how to deal with it. Don't be surprised. One of the other things I wrote down in my manual is that I told my pacers that they are not allowed to ask me, how are you doing? Are you okay? It's just like a rule. It's like a mindset thing, because the answer is going to be, I'm not doing well and I feel like crap, because they're pacing me from mile 62 to the finish. I've already run 62 miles through the mountains, through the wilderness, and I'm going to be pretty exhausted. So combining those two together, I basically said, look, when I hit the trail, when I Superman, just let me get up, dust off, and keep moving. And this is just going to happen, and this happens with you with your startup. You've got your plans ahead of you, the work sprint that you're doing, or the sales sprint that you're doing, or the quarterly forecast that you've got ahead of you, and things are going to happen, and you're going to fall down. You're going to fail. You're going to try a sales experiment with outbound, or you're going to try an experiment with hiring a head of sales or a VP of sales or an SDR, and sometimes those experiments are not going to work out the way you want them to. The key that you need to remember is that you're going to fall down. You should expect to fall down. And this proverb of fall down 7 times, get up 8 is absolutely true for you as you're running your startup. Because for me, as I went through the course, and here's a photograph of, and you can see here on my wrist, I still have this brace. I'm almost 3 weeks removed from the race, and I still have some pretty significant pain in my wrist, where I can't lift things, I can't turn a knob. I had to ask my wife to put salt on my plate yesterday morning, because the grinder, I couldn't twist the salt grinder because of the pressure. So I've got some torn, what we think is some torn ligaments, and a really, really deep bone bruise in there in my hand. And the reason that happened is because early in the race I fell. Probably, in the first 20 miles or so. I can't remember exactly when it happened, but I actually tripped and fell on a route, and it was some pretty soft trail, so I got lucky, but I did come down pretty hard on my right hand. And I remember thinking, like, that really hurt, but because the rest of my body landed on some soft dirt and some pine needles, I was just like, oh, okay. And there was a runner right behind me, and she even said, like, oh my gosh, are you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. It happens all the time. And I got up, dusted off, and down the trail I went. Where it got really painful is the second and the third time it happened, because it happened in the last 20 miles when I was running with my pacer, Jen. So now it's nighttime. I've been out there, this is past midnight. So it's 18, 19 hours into the race, and we're in some rocky terrain, and I kicked a rock and I fell on the exact same spot. And that time it hurt. It was like I came down on some rocks with my body, came down really hard on my wrist on the exact same spot, to the point where it was like really starting to swell up. And I got to the next aid station. I could not even take my water bottles out of my running pack. I couldn't grip my water bottles. I couldn't unscrew the caps. So when we got to the aid station, I told Jen, I'm like, you're going to have to take these bottles out, unscrew them, and refill them for me. My right hand is almost inoperable at this point. And so then, we kept moving, and then again, a third time, a couple more miles down the trail, Jen had stopped in the woods for a couple minutes to relieve herself. She said, you go ahead, I'll catch up. And I was running down the trail a couple hundred yards, and again, boom, hit another rock. And this time I saw stars. I mean, it was the hardest fall I'd taken. I just came down really hard. I ended up with huge bruises on both of my thighs. And again, a third time landed on the same exact spot on my right wrist. I forgot how to roll over, and just did not break the fall at all. All of my weight came down to my right wrist. And at that point, it was just like, holy crap. It was really painful. But here's the thing, and here's the lesson, right? And the reason that I told the Pacers, and I tell myself, like, this is going to happen. And when it happens, and even while I was laying there, I remember thinking to myself, you're in the middle of the trail. It's, however many miles to the next aid station. It's however, 13 more miles to the finish line. I fell. You fell. Scott, you fell. And you're laying here in the dirt. No one's coming to help you. No one can help you. Like, this is up to you. You've got to get up. You got to dust yourself off. And you got to keep moving. And that's all there is to it. And this quote, fall down 7 times, get up 8, was just sitting in my mind. In fact, I wrote this on the back of my Pacer card the day before as I was drawing out my Pacer card and preparing it. I even wrote this quote down on the back to remind myself throughout the course of the day, like, stuff is going to go bad. It's just going to go bad when you're doing hard things and you're on this journey. And yeah, you've got help around you. I had a Pacer, I had aid stations, there's people, medical personnel around me at these aid stations. But at the end of the day, it's like when you stumble and you fall, when your company stumbles and it falls, or it hits a root or a rock, an obstruction, an obstacle along the way, and you find yourself face first in the dust, staring at rocks. I had a headlamp. I still remember the image, that third fall. I remember the shape of those rocks, because the rocks were white. The dirt was actually, and the trail was actually pretty white, which is one of the reasons I didn't see a lot of the rocks. I mean, there's millions of rocks on this trail, like literally millions of rocks over 100 miles. And I just missed one, and I kicked it, and I fell over, and I came down with a hard oomph. And I just told myself, you got to get up. This is up to you. No one's going to finish this race for you, and no one's going to come to save you. It's like personal responsibility. I chose this. I'm out here. I knew this was going to happen. And so I made the decision. This is one of my pre-race lessons, was just like, I automated this decision weeks, months ahead, that when this fall happens, and I knew it was going to happen during the race, I was of course going to try to avoid it as much as possible, but falling over 100, at least once over a 100-mile race is going to happen. And I told myself, when this happens, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get up, make sure I'm not, injured significantly to the point where I, maybe tore a leg ligament or something like that, or broke a bone. But like, it's going to happen. And so when this happens, this is what I do. I'm going to get up, dust myself off, and keep moving. And that's what you've got to do as well with your startup. You just got to know that these things are going to happen. And you know that when this happens, it's up to you to get up and keep moving. Later on, after the race was over, I remember we were chatting with Jen at the finish line, and she even, she told Lena afterwards that she's like, I knew Scott was a pretty tough guy, like in terms of his fortitude, but she's like, I've not really seen anybody as tough as him, because like, he took some pretty nasty falls, and he just got up, didn't complain, and just kept moving. And part of that is just like knowing that these things are going to happen, be willing to deal with the pain, be willing to automate the decisions. Like, when this happens, you're just going to get up, dust yourself off, and keep moving. So fall down 7 times, get up 8. So that's lesson number 9 from the trail. So the last lesson that I want to talk about is probably, the 10th lesson, might be even the most important lesson, which is, be happy. Be happy. What do I mean by that? Well, you're out there, you're doing your thing, you're running your startup, and you chose this. The good and the bad, the ugly, the falls, the ups, the downs, the swings, the peaks, the valleys, all of those are what you chose. And when you think about this journey, however tough it is, I think it's so critical to remind yourself that throughout that journey, you've just got to be happy about it. And there's so many reasons for me to think about how to stay happy and be happy throughout the course of this race, and the months leading up to it in training, and the years leading up to it, so I could even get to a point where I could get into this race. So here's a picture of my son sitting on the infield at Placer High School, which is where the race finishes. And way in the background, now I've enlarged this picture in the past, just to see what time it was. And this is a picture of my son sitting on the infield at Placer High School, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting a little choked up thinking about this, because when I think about all of the help and the support that I have from my family, and afterwards, after the race, I'm coming into the stadium, and just knowing that I've done it. I've done what I wanted to do. I set out years ago to do this race, and I did it. And now I'm going through the finish line, and it's over. And so here's a couple of photos of my wife and son and me after the race, and you can just see, of course, my son being 9. In one picture, he's got a big smile. In the other picture, he's just kind of tired and a little mopey, which is totally understandable. But I look at these pictures and I remember these moments sitting there at the finish line with them and feeling this level of happiness, because all throughout that journey, both throughout the day, but throughout the weeks and months and years, that they've always been there. And this happiness that I have and this joy that I have, this privilege that I have to do these kinds of things. I think it's just important for you as you're running your startup to think about, however things go in that race that you're on, whether you hit the finish line or not, or you get to the checkpoints you want to get to with fundraising or sales or growth or market share, or whatever that is. I think it's critical to just remember every moment along the way to stay happy. And even during the race, I've got some corollaries here about this lesson 10 of be happy. Because corollary number 1 is that comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is a thief of joy. So when I looked at my finishing times and I looked at some of the data and where I came in at the end of the race, my finishing time was 24 hours, 39 minutes, and 40 seconds. 24, 39, 40 was my official stated time. And, I went into this race. I did all of my training, everything I talked about. I had 23, 59, 59 posted on my bathroom wall. I wrote it down every single day in my morning journal as I was doing morning pages, 23, 59, 59. All of my training, all of the coaching, everything that I did was designed for me to break that barrier, to hit that goal. And I didn't do it. And even during the race, the last 30 miles of the race, last 25 miles of the race, I just knew the chances of me hitting this were pretty low. And I've talked about this in previous installments, where even at those moments during the race when I knew the sub 24 hour time was out of my reach, I still felt happy about what I was accomplishing throughout the course of the race. And I've talked about some of the data here. So when I look at the data, my finishing time, and compared to previous years and of other runners in that race, I had mentioned in another installment that I knew going into the race, in order to break 24 hours, I was going to have to be probably in the top 25% of runners, because historically over the last 10 years, the average number of runners that's finished in sub 24 has been about 30% of the runners. And I also knew in hot years, which this was a hot year with the temperatures hitting 100 degrees, that sub 24 rate drops below 20%. And in this year, the final tally was 57 of the 315 people that started the race finished under 24 hours. So that's 18.1%. Turns out I came in at my percentage was 18.4%, meaning that my place, I was number 58 in the total race count. I was the first person that finished after 24 hours. The person that finished ahead of me finished nearly 45, 46 minutes ahead of me. So there was just the people that finished in under 24 hours There's 57 of those people, and then 45 minutes later, here I come across the finish line. And so my sub 24 rate, the sub 24 rate for the race was 18.1% of the runners, which is the lowest that number has been since 2009. And I came in 18.4. And going into the race, I told myself I was going to have to be a top 25% of the runners out there in order to have a chance. And I was, by a lot. So like I did everything I wanted to do in this race. So I finished 58th overall, right? 18.4 percentile. That includes, here's from the runner's guide from the race that they publish. They highlighted about 22 women, top women, including pro athletes and people that have won, women that have won races that they expect to do really well in this race. They also profiled 22 men, including my coach, Jeff Browning, was one of those professional men, as well as other runners who they expected to finish really, with strong times. So there's 44 people of those that going into the race that I just knew were way faster than me, right? And I finished at 58. Like, this is amazing. It's an amazing accomplishment for me. And I've got this, at the end of the day, they give you the silver buckle, or the silver buckle if you finish in sub 24, you get a bronze buckle if you finish the race. So I was the first bronze buckle, person that came across the finish line. And so, as much as I could look at, I wasn't fast enough, or all of those people were faster than me, or, what did I do wrong? There's no reason for me to compare myself to the other 57 people that finished ahead of me that broke 24 hours. And there's no reason for me to compare myself to the people, including the 100-some people that didn't even finish the race. Over a third of the people who started the race didn't even finish the race. And I was one of the top 58. So, like, I was finishing the race, and I'm like, I'm damn proud of that. Because I put in the work, I put in the effort, I put in the time. I did everything I could possibly do to get myself ready for this race. And even further, I look back and go like, wow, if I didn't do all of that work, if I didn't do the 3 trail runs a week, if I didn't do 45 days of 2 workouts a day starting in March, if I didn't do all the nutrition, if I didn't do all the race planning, if I didn't have the coach who was pushing me, would I have been one of those 100+ people who didn't finish? High likelihood. And certainly, even if I did finish, I wouldn't have come in the 24 hours and 39 minutes that I did. So it took all of that effort just to get to that time. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't fast enough. And that's okay. There's no place across a race where I could find like 1 or 2 places where I could find 39 minutes and think to myself like, oh geez, if I'd have just done this a little better, I would have broken 24 hours. Or if I just did that a little faster, I would have broken 39. I would have broken 24 hours. Like, yeah, maybe a couple aid stations I could have moved a little faster. Maybe a couple stretches of trail that I was walking, I could have run. Maybe the areas I was running, I could have run a little faster. But even there, I can't like find little pockets of minutes here and there and add up to 39 minutes. I just wasn't fast enough despite all of my training. But all of that training is what got me to that place. And so when I crossed that finish line, I just felt happy because I knew I'd put in the work. And I think this is so important that whatever you're doing, whatever you accomplish with your startup, with your company, I know that you have got big lofty goals to be the unicorn or to be the next whatever, Facebook, Tesla, Google, whatever that is for your industry. And you should have those. If you're truly solving an important problem in the marketplace that nobody has solved before, and you're adding value, and you know that your product solves that problem, and you know how to service your customers, and you know that they're getting tremendous value out of the service that you're providing to them, then yeah, absolutely, have those big, hairy, audacious goals. Create that vision. Execute on that vision. Go for it. But even if you don't get there in the time that you expect, or you don't get the growth that you're expecting to get, it's important to look around and say, like, I took nothing. I took an idea, this intangible idea that you conjured up in your mind. You saw a problem, you say, somebody ought to fix that problem. Like, boom, I got an idea. for a product or for a company. You took that idea and you created everything that's around you right now. So whether you have 2 customers or 20 or 200, whether you're doing 20K in revenue or 200K in revenue or 2 million in revenue or 20 million in revenue, wherever you are in that journey, don't worry about what other people are doing. Like, take a moment and just say, wow, look what we've done. Started with nothing and we're at this place, and be happy with that. And yes, you want to drive for the next place, the next checkpoint. I've already started getting back into training mode. I've got another race coming up on August 15th, Castle Peak 100K race up in Tahoe. And that's going to be a darn hard race. And yeah, I'm thinking about that. But here I am 3 weeks after the race at the Western States 100, and I'm still thinking about the success that I had in that race. So corollary 1 is comparison is the thief of joy. Don't look around and say, oh, I should have beat that person, or I should have been faster, or what if this, what if that, right? Just tell yourself, be happy. Corollary number 2 is something I talk about all the time. And this was one of my pre-race lessons as well, which is the journey is the joy. The journey is the joy. And that just means, that journey for me, it extends for the race itself, that day, starting at 5 a.m. when the gun goes off, all the way through to the time I hit the finish line. And it extends out for the weeks and months that I'm training and the years that went into preparing to even qualify to do this race. So in the race itself, I remember thinking to myself, there were moments in the race, I had my pace card, and I knew what times I wanted to be at certain aid stations, certain checkpoints along the way. I've talked about this in other installments. And I remember thinking to myself, as I was hitting those checkpoints, I got to Miller's Defeat at 1:14. On my card, I wanted to be there at 1:15. I remember getting there going like, yes, like this is awesome. And when it was hot and I'm climbing up Devil's Thumb, and it's a 1,500 foot climb at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the heat of the day, it's 100 degrees in the canyon. And it sucked. And it took me almost 50 minutes to get to the top, to go 1.5 miles. Really slow going, stifling heat. I remember thinking to myself, hey, I chose to be here. This is what I knew was going to happen. This is what I expected. This is the full, complete race experience that people talk about with the Western States 100. This is why it's one of the most prestigious races out there, because it's hard. People are in the canyon. People talk about being in the canyons in the middle of the day and how difficult it is getting through the canyons, and then trying to switch into race mode late in the race. So even as I'm going along, I remember thinking to myself, the journey is the joy. Even when I fell, I remember that third time that I fell. As much as, you run the race and you get the buckle and it's the accolades and the thing that you can put I just put everything, all of my medals and race stuff in a shoebox. It's sitting on the top of my closet somewhere, back home, top of my shelf. Like when I hit that dirt the third time and seeing stars and my hand just throbbing with pain, I remember thinking to myself, this is why I'm here. I'm here for this, not to hit the ground and be in pain and injure my wrist, but I'm here to see how hard I can push myself. Can I put myself in a position of distress or stress or difficulty and get myself to keep going forward, relentless forward progress? Can I do it? That's why I do it. That's why I do these races, not for the buckle, not for the finish line, but to see how hard I can push myself, because that's the true measure. And so that's part of the journey. The journey is the joy, right? And at the end of the day, like I look back on this trail and you just think about it. Like I was joking with my wife when I was getting a ride up to Olympic Village to start the race. My friend Kelly gave me a ride up there, and as I was leaving the house, as I was leaving Kelly's house, she dropped me off at Kelly's house. I said, so Kelly's going to drive me up to Olympic Valley. I'll meet you halfway home, which is really not a joke, because from Olympic Valley to Auburn, it's 100 miles on the trail. But Auburn to my house is about 50 miles. And Auburn to Olympic Village is about 50 miles. So I like going up to the top of Olympic Village at Squaw Valley and getting dropped off there and running halfway back to Davis. It's kind of ridiculous. So I look back at this and just think, like, that was pretty amazing, right? I'm going up and down these mountains and hitting these checkpoints Like that whole journey along the way is the reason that I'm out there. And that journey extends out, not, like I said, not just for race day, but all the way back to January 6th. I remember the first morning I got up at 4 o'clock to drive out to this place called Lagoon Valley, where I do these repeats. I've done these, almost every Wednesday throughout the course of the winter and into the spring. I was out there doing these repeats, up and down, up and down, up and down. And I remember that first day out there, I knew it was going to suck. And even the notes in my training guide, I wrote about what I could expect. The climbs were a grind, but get it done. And so begins the march to Western States. That's part of the grind. When I did 5 workouts in 50 hours, when it's raining and it's cold and it sucks to be out there, I tell myself, I chose this. This is the reason why I'm out here, is to make myself stronger, to make myself tougher. And that journey goes back not just for training, but goes back over the last couple of years. So back in 2016, all of the work that went into getting me ready for this race started years ago. So back in 2016, I attempted this ultra triathlon called Uberman. Some of you who have been following me for a while might remember this. Uberman was a multi-day triathlon. The swim was 21 miles across the Catalina Channel. That was the swim portion of this triathlon. The bike portion was 400 miles from Los Angeles to Death Valley. And the run portion was a 135-mile ultra marathon from Badwater, which is the lowest point in the continental U.S., up to the portal at Mount Whitney. I didn't finish that race. I did the full swim. I did a good chunk of the bike. I did a good chunk of the run. And it took me 5 days to make the progress that I did. But again, it's like choosing hard things. It's just training you to get ready for the next thing. And that's all, when I look back, all of that's part of this journey. And I look back at that fondly and remember, those are the things where people talk about bite off more than don't bite off more than you can chew. I'm actually a big fan of biting off more than you can chew. There's this old Zig Ziglar saying this. I used to listen to Zig Ziglar audio cassettes when I used to be a sales rep driving around in the car years ago. And one of the things that he said in one of his sessions was, you don't know how big your mouth is until you can bite off more than you can chew. That's always stuck in my brain. And so, attempting hard things, Uberman was absolutely insane to even try doing this. There's only one other person that even tried to do this ultra triathlon solo. The other people that were trying it were doing it as part of a team. So, it was hard, but that's part of the journey that got me here. And even further, going back to my first ultra back in 2015, a 50-mile race. I remember taking a video of myself as I was coming up to the finish line, thinking to myself, I did it. 50 miles. At the time, I remember 50 miles felt unfathomable. Holy cow, I covered 50 miles in one day. I covered that in 10 hours and 9 minutes or something. I remember thinking, I can't believe I just ran 50 miles. But again, that's part of the journey. Going even further back, 2010, when I did my first Ironman triathlon in Coeur d'Alene. It's a picture of my wife and I. This was even before my son was born, before we even thought about having kids. And finishing that race in under 13 hours and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I just did an Ironman triathlon. So all of these things are part of the journey. And that, I think it's just so critical to remember the journey is the joy. There's always going to be the next big thing. There's always going to be another checkpoint. There's always going to be another race. There's always going to be another round of financing that you need to close. There's always going to be the next level of revenue that you need to hit, whether it's going from 1 million to 3 million or 3 million to 10 million or 10 million to 30 or 30 to 100. All of those are just like the next ultra marathon for you. And as much as those checkpoints are so critical, those next two levels are so important for you to make the impact that you want to make with your startup, always remember to be happy. You chose this. The journey is the joy, and comparison is the thief of joy. So the last thing I'll say about the journey is the joy is, as much as I'm looking back over the last 10, 11 years to get myself ready to even be able to do this race, it even as much as this morning, getting up and doing a 7-mile run, and I'm out on a nature trail and looking around and it's 6:30 in the morning. I'm the only person out there, and on this nature trail there's I've seen raccoons and deer and a dead mink on the side, which in a lot of ways is sad to see this animal laying there on the ground. I've seen a blue heron out there. In other trail runs, I've seen skunks just on the trail. I've seen bear footprints. I've seen cougar footprints. And like being able to be in a position where I can get up and do these things. Every morning I can get up and go for a run. I have the physical capacity to do that. I have the luxury of a life that allows me to get up and make that the first thing I do in the morning, because I have a business and I have wealth enough to pay our mortgage and save some money and do things that we want to do. I have more than 99.999999% of the people in this world. And most of us that are listening, most of you, like you personally listening to this, as much as you might be struggling with your startup and you're taking less pay than you would if you had that office job. Maybe you've cut back on health insurance, and maybe things have been really tough around the pandemic. But just remember, look around you and just remember, there's so many things that you can be grateful for. That your life is better than most other people. That you get to do this every single day. You get to, when you tell people at your family at Thanksgiving dinner, or friends that you're seeing, and they go, wow, you're a startup founder. I've always wanted to run a startup. I've always wanted to start a company. But they haven't done it. You have. You've taken that step. You've taken that risk. You're putting yourself out there. And like I said at the very beginning of some of these installments, the success, the struggle is guaranteed, but the success is not. So enjoy that struggle, because it's just part of the journey, and the journey is the joy. So I hope that's helpful for you. The last thing I want to just leave you with is this personal mantra that I have that first came to me after competing in Uberman back in 2016. It was this idea of go farther. And you might have heard me say this in other episodes or LinkedIn Lives, or you might see this in some of my blog posts or emails that go out. This idea of hashtag go farther. And this idea of go farther is when I chose to do attempt Uberman, those distances were obscene. A 21-mile swim, a 400-mile bike, 135-mile ultramarathon, trying to do that in 5 or 6 days. That's just pure insanity. But I looked at that and I said, well, whether I complete it or not, this is going to push me. It's going to stretch me. So yeah, physically I'm going to go farther, but metaphorically, I'm also going to go farther. And so when you set those lofty goals for yourself and you do the work and you put in the time, you put in the effort, you do everything possible to try to reach those outcomes, that's going to put you in a position where whether or not you hit the outcome that you wanted to hit, you're going to do more than you would have done without those lofty goals. And like I just said today, be happy as you're going through that journey, because the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys, the rocks and roots along the way, those are just part of the gig, as part of what you signed up for. So yeah, it's okay to stew about something that didn't go your way and be upset and be pissed off, but then say, give yourself 5 minutes to be upset about it and say, okay, this is the way it's supposed to go. It's not supposed to be easy. I chose this. What can I learn from this? What's good about this situation that I can apply and learn to make sure I don't replicate this mistake a second time? So number one, setting lofty goals allows you to do more. The journey is the joy, allows you to be happy. And at the end of the day, when you're on this journey and you're trying to push yourself, you're going to surprise yourself. You're going to surprise yourself in terms of what you're capable of, what you can do, the person that you are becoming, because the person you are today is going to be different than the person you were yesterday when you put this effort in and you set these goals. So I just want you, regardless of your situation, whether you're on track to IPO on the New York Stock Exchange, or you're just trying to get to the next customer so you can have a good case to raise a seed round, just remember to do more, be happy, surprise yourself, go farther. So that's it. That's the fourth and final installment of my post-race startup lessons from the trail. If you're digging this content and you would like to hear more about it, then I definitely encourage you to just, if you're listening to this on the podcast, just leave a review, or make sure you subscribe if you haven't. Tell a friend or 10. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, give us a vote, give us an upvote or a like or a comment. Just let me know that this is helpful for you. And if any of these startup lessons are useful for you, or you want to learn how you can apply those to your business, if you want some help, maybe you just need somebody to push you to help you do more. Maybe you need to get some perspective on how to be happy. You want to surprise yourself, but you're not sure how. Then there's a chance that maybe the team and I here at SalesQualia can help you out. So if you want to just have a quick chat about your situation to see if or how we can help you out, then I'd encourage you to either DM me here on LinkedIn. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, you can leave a comment down below, with the word journey. If you're listening to this or watching it later on YouTube or listening on the podcast, just shoot me an email, scott@salesqualia, QUALIA.com, scott@salesqualia.com, and just write the word private or journey in the subject heading. That'll just let me know you want to have a quick chat. Just talk. We'll have a quick talk about your situation. We'll knock around a few ideas to figure out if or how we can help you out here at SalesQualia. And if we can, then we can always spend some more time together and talk about how that works. And if not, then I will do everything I can to point you in the right direction, because I've had lots of coaches, lots of mentors over the years, both personal, professional, in my training, and it's not always a good fit, for each other. Maybe you need some help that, you're not a good fit for what we do here, or maybe we're not a good fit for where you are with your company and what you need most. So, whether you get help from me or somebody else is less important than you taking the step, taking the action to ask for help, find some expertise, make sure that you're giving yourself all of the chances in the world to be successful so you can reach and make the impact that you want to make. So do more, be happy, surprise yourself, go farther. That's it for now. This is Scott Sambucci signing off.